And we will be able then to get into the deep of some of the details of accompanying guidance to the methodology focused on the agri-food that will be presented by Sam Vionnet, and also for the chemical sector. It will be presented by Tatiana Vetter. We will then have some time for a Q&A session and discussion that will be led by Christine Heller. And in the closing, we'll have some highlights from Christine Heller about the future uptake of the transparent methodology. So if we can move to the next slide, I will be running you and introducing you about what is transparent, which has been the motivation and the aim of the project. So we move to the next slide. Transparent project has been kindly supported by and generously supported and funded by the European Commission through the LIFE program. It's a project that has been led by the Value Balancing Alliance, and we built a consortium integrated by the Value Balancing Alliance, the Capitals Coalition, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So the objective of the project is and was to support the implementation of the Green Deal, the European Commission Green Deal, to achieve the targets of CO2 reduction of emissions by 2030. So our contribution has been to develop a pragmatic solution for corporate natural capital management accounting and decision making. So this has been recently recognized in some documents related to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So the recognition of transparent as a contribution to the space of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive proposal. If we move to the next slide, I will run you through a bit of the evolution and how the landscape has been evolving and brought us to start working on the transparent project. So we are building from the initial work of the program of United Nations focused on the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity, building the case to incorporate the values of biodiversity and ecosystem services in decision making. So from that program, the Natural Capital Coalition published the framework of the Natural Capital Protocol. So in 2016, it was the result of bringing together all the existing approaches at that time focused on how to measure and value impacts and dependencies on natural capital. So we created a framework, a decision-making framework that was harmonizing the existing approaches. After the launch of the Natural Capital Protocol, there was a proliferation of many applications, mainly for business. And we are also, from the Natural Capital Coalition, developing some accompanying sector guidance and some supplements. One of the main ones, it was for the finance sector supplement that has been now picked up by the TNFD to build the basis of the framework. So in 2019, it was the year of biodiversity. So there was an initiative focused on aligning and really addressing the challenge of how to measure biodiversity. So there was a big progress on the measurement. And also in that year, the Natural Capital Coalition, we launched the biodiversity guidance. So it was taking that measurement and integrating all the measurement of biodiversity in a framework of decision-making and accompanied by some guidance also for valuation of biodiversity. In 2020, new organizations came with new approaches to natural capital accounting. It was the case of the Value Balancing Alliance and also the impact weighted accounts. So it was the moment in which, with all the progress and all the work that has been developed since the launch of the Natural Capital Protocol, that we came together to work on trying to standardize natural capital accounting with a special focus on the measurement and evaluation bit. So the European Commission has been funding two sister projects, Transparent, that is focused on the broader natural capital accounting, and our sister project that is aligning content approaches for biodiversity, that is complementing and bringing some further insights on how to do it with the biodiversity element. If we move to the next slide, I will explain you which is the aim and more which is the scope of transparent methodology. So we wanted to progress on the standardization of natural capital management accounting. So for that, we have developed a methodology to create We moved into having more consistency in how business measure and value their impact and dependency on natural capital, with a particular focus on delivering or focusing on the approach of developing environmental profit and loss accounts. So we have been building in all the progress that was done by the Natural Capital Protocol and focusing our attention on the measurement and valuation element of the protocol. So transparent methodology provides more consistency in two elements. First, what should be measured, and second, how business should measure and value natural capital impacts and dependencies. So the scope and what we have been covered is the whole natural capital, covering and focusing on the assets of impacts and dependencies on air, water, land, and biodiversity, with the Align project bringing an extra focus on the more challenging element of biodiversity. We move to the next slide. I can show you here what we have been doing since we launched the project in 2020. So we started conducting a benchmarking analysis, trying to understand and talking with companies, understanding the approaches that they were using and also the gaps that needed to be covered. Based on that information, we developed the first version of transparent methodology that was open for consultation in the summer of 2021. So we had the consultation running till the end of the year. Some of the comments of the consultation is that we needed to bring some methods. So there was a couple of methods. So that's why we ran a call for methods also. And in 2022, we did a piloting exercise with businesses to have their insights on the applicability of the methodology. So with all the learnings from the consultation, the call for methods, and the piloting, we have been reviewing the methodology. So that is what we are launching today. And we have been developing accompanying sector guidance. We are going to see and go in depth on two of them, the agri-food and the chemical, but also we have developed one for apparel. So with this introduction, I hand over to Anna Karamat to explain us the motivations to support the Transparent project. I hand over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. So my name is Anna Karamat. I work in the biodiversity unit of DG Environment of the European Commission. And I work generally on business and biodiversity and economic aspects of biodiversity. As you know, the European Green Deal sets out our systemic response to tackling climate change and environmental related challenges that we are currently facing in an inclusive way. To achieve these objectives of the Green Deal, it is recognized that we need to transform our economy and our society to put it on a more sustainable path. And for that purpose, climate and environmental considerations need to be better integrated into government and business decision making. And that is why the development of natural capital accounting methodologies continues to be a priority for the Commission, as well as the promotion of its uptake by companies. Natural capital accounting is key for the assessment and integration of environmental impacts and risks into business strategy and decision-making processes. It can also provide meaningful information for external reporting to investors and civil society. In line with this, the Commission decided to support the Transparent project under the EU LIFE program. And we'd like to thank very much the Value Balancing Alliance, the Capitals Coalition, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for the excellent and very competent work on the Transparent project. And we congratulate you on the release of the Natural Capital Management Accounting methodology. This methodology is the first set of guidance, on what elements of natural capital companies should include in assessments and how to measure and value them. It's an important milestone in our endeavor to institutionalize natural capital accounting. I hope that it will be taken up and used by many companies and that it will provide them with a useful tool to improve the sustainability of their business models. Thank you very much. Over to you again.
Thank you, Anna. So with this, Clara will run us and give us the main highlights of the transparent methodologies. So Clara,
Thank you, Marta. Yeah, my name is Clara Urmer. I'm working at the VBA, and I've been one of the authors of the transparent methodology, or how we now call it, natural capital management accounting methodology. When we go on to the next slide, you can see an overview of the documents that have been developed within the transparent project. So the first document that has been also released today is the NCMA methodology, which stands for Natural Capital Management Accounting, because the focus of the transparent project is, as was mentioned already by Marta, the management piece of it, to develop an EP&L dashboard that can be used for business steering, and the information then also potentially be used for external disclosure. So that's the main first document, the methodology, but we have also developed some guidance documents to help companies actually implement the methodology in practice. The first document also released today is the general guidance document, which provides practical guidance on to support the implementation. And additional to sector agnostic general guidance, 3 sector-specific guidances have been developed, which is the agri-food sector guidance, the apparel sector guidance, as well as the chemical sector guidance. These documents will be released in a few weeks' time, so stay tuned to not miss the documents when they are published. All of those documents follow the same structure, such that it is easy for you to switch around and to find the relevant information to apply the methodology. They follow the structures as follows. First, we provide some background information on the transparent project and natural capital management accounting. Then in the second section, in the introduction, you find information about the document, the intended uses, general principles, as well as basic concepts. In the third section, about objective and scope, we define the objective, which is, as it was mentioned by Marta, also the environmental profit and loss as the first and main application of it. But also, if you want to use this kind of information for a specific type of decision, you find information on the objective there in the general guidance. And scope, here we refer to the scope as an organizational focus and the value chain boundaries that should be considered, for instance, considering the overall value chain of companies. The fourth section is on measure and value, and I will come back to this in a few minutes because this is the most extensive section of the documents about the measuring and valuing the impacts of companies on society. The fifth section is on dependencies and value to business, and I will also come to this on the next slide. And then section 6 is on using the results. Here you find information about the interpretation of results and how to communicate them. And then in the last section, the annexes, you find additional information such as potential results templates that are useful for application of the methodology. Now I want to focus on the methodology and quickly talk about the general guide in the end. So the methodology covers 2 perspectives of the both perspectives of the double materiality perspective, which is, first of all, the value to society perspective. So about the inside out perspective of companies, about measuring and valuing the costs and benefits of the business activities to the wider society, which we call also impacts. This is the clear focus of the methodology and covered extensively throughout. We also have some first high-level methodology included on the value to business perspective, which is the outside-in perspective, about the measuring and valuing the reliance of a business on and the use of natural capital. So what is also sometimes referred to as dependencies, and typically already covered, at least to some extent, by companies in their risk assessments that they already do today. On the next slide, I want to consider as second part of this scope question which are the impact drivers. So the method uses impact drivers to understand natural capital accounting as part of the management process. We cover 6 impact drivers, whereas each of them includes multiple indicators, as you can see here on the slide. So the 6 that are included in transparent are GHG emissions, non-GHG emissions, water consumption, water pollution, land use, and solid waste. These 6 impact drivers have been chosen based on the maturity of available impact pathways and the relevance for most sectors. We see them as a minimum criteria for assessment and recommend that other additional impacts should be considered if identified as relevant for the company on a base cases. For some impact drivers, you also see that additional indicators are recognized, but currently out of scope of the methodology, here marked in gray, because there's no methodology currently available to measure and value those consistently, but we do acknowledge them, and you can add them, or we recommend to add them as soon as a methodology is available. On the next slide, I want to quickly show that the 6 impact drivers covered within the transparent project or in the NCMA methodology are closely aligned to other frameworks such as IPES, SBTN, and our sister project Align. Different organizations use different terminologies for the impact drivers and or pressures, how they are sometimes called, but or also different groupings. But in general, we are very closely aligned, and this is just what we wanted to demonstrate with this short slide here. For simple crosswalk, you can refer back to this overview. The methodology follows an impact pathway approach to model how impact drivers eventually impact society. And the figure that you can see on this slide here that shows this link from an impact driver, what we have just seen, through changes in natural capital, which again lead to changes in ecosystem services provided by those by the natural capital, which eventually impact society. So the impact drivers are the 6 ones just listed. For the change in natural capital, we have split those into 4 categories: air, water, land, and biodiversity, whereas the biodiversity part is complemented by our sister project Align. And these 4 categories are, of course, interrelated. So it's not a clear split between air, water, land, and biodiversity, but they are actually interrelated, which is also shown here. The change in natural capital then affects changes in ecosystem services, which are grayed out here because we don't model these explicitly in the NCMA methodology, but we reference those because it's easier for understanding how society is eventually impacted by the change in natural capital. The impacts on society are in the end modeled and valued in monetary terms, and we do recognize that monetization of those impacts is helpful to develop the environmental profit and loss dashboard and to display the impacts next to financial values. Yet it is not always the most suitable information for all stakeholders, so we do recommend that the information should be complemented with additional information that is specific to the stakeholders' needs, such as qualitative information or quantitative information on the measured impact drivers. On the next slide, I want to show you an example of such an impact pathway for GHG emissions. And here you see the impact driver, GHG emissions, which covers multiple indicators such as carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, or others GHG emissions. These impact drivers then lead to changes in natural capital, like GHG concentrations or rising sea levels, which in the end, of course, also impact society through human health, such as heat stress, or in the extreme case, even malnutrition, the built environment, such as damages from extreme weather events or rising sea levels, the agricultural yields, such as losses in crop growth, and resource costs, such as increased production costs. For another example of such an impact pathway, on the next slide, we have a quick look at the water pollution impact pathway, where you see that the impact driver water pollution covers organic pollutants, inorganic pollutants, nutrient pollutants, and we do recognize that pathogens, thermal pollution, and other pollutants might be relevant, but currently out of scope of the methodology. These lead to changes in natural capital, which are for water pollution mostly related to water, and these changes in natural capital eventually affect society through human health, such as illnesses due to decreased water quality, property values such as loss in value due to changes in water quality, fish stock, like changes in fish yield, and recreational benefits of society for society due to the water pollution, which then decrease. With these two examples on the next slide, I want to briefly talk about the 3 measure and value steps that are the focus of the methodology, and which follow exactly the impact pathways that you have just seen. So step 1 is measure your impact driver. For instance, when we go back to the GHG example, measure the emissions of CO2 equivalents in tons. Then the second step is measure the changes in the state of natural capital, how is natural capital affected and by how much? So for example, by shifting climate patterns. And then the third step is to value those impacts on society. So how is society impacted and by how much? And then eventually value those in monetary terms. In practice, step 2 and step 3 are typically combined when applying value factors. So for instance, if you use social costs of carbon to estimate the impact on society, you already cover parts of the step 2 and step 3 in one step, basically. Speaking about practical application, I want to also talk about the general guidance on the next slide, because this document is intended to support and help corporates to implement the methodology in a business context. It's a sector agnostic practical guidance that is strongly based on the piloting feedback that we have received, as well as expert knowledge that supported the development of these documents. In the guidance, you find, for example, additional information on the process to set up natural capital management accounting. So which steps should we follow? How did others do this previously in the pilots? Then you also find information, a lot actually, about data sources and guiding questions for selecting those to simplify the application for you. And then we also, for example, included an introduction, the short example about input-output modeling, because input-output modeling, we could see in the piloting as well that many companies apply this, especially at the beginning, when to assess their upstream value chains. So this should also be helpful for you to get into this topic and learn how to do it. With this short introduction about the methodology and the general guidance document, I hand over back to Marta, or directly to Sam, for providing some information about the agri-food guidance.
Thank you, Clara. Yeah, we can move directly to the next slide as an introduction. And I would like to give you a quick overview of the type of content we embedded in this guidance that cover really the objective, the scoping and materiality, the data availability and data collection issues, and how we measure and value the different impact drivers. So we cover all those steps, but a lot of resources have been published in the agri-food sector in the past 15, 20 years. So we have a lot of data, methodology. So our objective is not to be exhaustive here, but more to point out to practical resources, whether it is data or methodologies. I think we see, see the slide, really practical resources that we selected and created to help with the process for any company to start measuring the natural capital impact. And to ensure that really that it is a consistent exercise across organization. So let's have a look at the different section and what we embedded. Of course, it won't be comprehensive, but it's just to give you some hint on how useful it is. First, on objective and scoping phase, we embedded an overview of the materiality of the different life cycle stages of the agri-food sector across the impact drivers. This is a type of table that we have, and we have a text describing how impact drivers and life cycle stages in the agri-food sector relate to help people realize the importance of some activities versus some impact drivers, and that will help people set set priorities in defining the scope of the assessment. So that there is a big section on that to really introduce the topic. Next slide. We embedded different tables to also address the issue of data availability. So here we have a table, like this is just a header, like the top of the table around the which kind of data we can collect, primary data we can collect from which stakeholders, in which format, etc., with the complexity of collecting the data. And that will really set a baseline about like all the kind of primary data we can collect along the value chain of in the agri-food sector. And if we move to the next slide, we will see also that we address existing database for secondary data this time. So we have the primary data, which is really the data collection from the organization towards the suppliers, the partners, etc. And secondary data is existing data that has already been collected that exists in dataset, for example, EcoInvent, AgriBalise, as we can see in the upper table, but also which is available in tools, online tools mostly. For example, the Cool Farm tool already contains a lot of information and data and method to be able to measure, for example, GHG emission, land use, and water use. So that's practical tool that can facilitate the accounting for natural capital for organization in this sector. Yeah, and we provide a range of information, whether they cover, they have a global coverage, whether they're free or paid, how comprehensive they are. So we try to bring a bit of insight so people can make a choice about the resource they want to use in priority. Next slide. Yeah, so we provide, of course, a bit more detail, an overview of what are the key methods to measure impact drivers, whether it is in quantitative metrics or monetary. There is still the choice for every users to do one or the other, but we provide in comprehensive tables and text description, the different method that can be used to do that. So that's something that is that we covered already partly. And if we move to the next slide, please. And we provide as well a case study along the documents, the guidance on how this plays out here for green bean sourcing from Brazil. This is based on a real case study that we developed with the company. But it's anonymized, and we don't know exactly, but we scale it to 10 tons of green bean, and we show how we collected the data, how we plugged the impact drivers and the quantification of impact, and everything is really detailed along the guidance, so that we can see how the guidance relate to a concrete example. As an illustration. But again, it's not to replace the general guidance here. It's really to provide a really insight into the application for the agri-food sector only, and a selection of the resources and description of how we do it in this field. It's again not a repetition of the general guidance. So that's it. That's a short preview of what is contained in this guide. And I will let the next speaker cover the next topic, chemical guidance.
Thank you very much, Sam. Tatiana Vedder, BSF. Yeah, thank you very much again, especially to Samuel for this comprehensive overview of agri-food guidance. And the chemical guidance follows very much the same approach and the same structure as agri-food and apparel guidance. So I would prefer to skip this part, but I would really like to draw your attention to very specific momentum for the chemical industry, and not only. The chemical industry is undergoing a real high-speed transformation to circular economy. Just 1 week ago, as you all probably heard, United Nations member states met in Paris to negotiate the global treaty to end plastic pollution. And one of the focus topics of current negotiations is the establishment of a harmonized global reporting metrics for public and private sector to achieve a full picture across the entire plastics economy. Yeah, so it's much more than only chemical industry. It's about the entire plastic economy and exposure to many customer industries of chemicals. And another key topics of the negotiations are assigning a value to waste. This is very new and very important right now. And decreasing a negative impact on health of waste workers, especially in developed countries. And now, getting back to transparent and why our work is so important right now. Chemical industry is already very skilled and very experienced in quantification of impact using life cycle assessment and other methodologies like mass balance, for example, methodologies that provide quantified results in terms of volumes, in terms of tons and so on. But building on these methodologies, transparent is adding a really new layer and enables completely new assessment of corporate activities in monetary terms to understand a real environmental and social impact. Transparent methodology and application guidance for chemical industry supports a user in making a choice of materials, in deciding on amount of process needed, in evaluating supply chain locations, so on and so on. And of course, we face many challenges as industry, and especially a data challenge. It's all about getting the data, about setting up a robust data collection process, about availability and sharing of supplier data, about getting more specific upstream data, sharing data, and tracing our product downstream. So we face many challenges, and not only in our industries, but also in other industries. And I think that transparent is really a step forward now, yeah. And I'm so happy and congratulate the team on release of the methodology and guidance, because I think you are just on time right now, and that this work is very much needed, especially now. Thank you.
So thanks all for the introductions. As you see from the agenda, we have about 15 minutes for discussions now, as we're a little bit ahead of time. Let's go for 20 minutes. So please raise your hand and Justine will call you up, or put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and the people here online will try to answer as best as possible. So looking forward. Anyone as an icebreaker? So if not yet,
I have the question.
two raised hands. Yeah.
Yeah. One is from Mappy.
Yes, Marta. So, hello everyone. My question is with respect to the oil and gas industry. So, this NCMA guidance, is it applicable on the projects going on in the oil and gas sector also, whether offshore or onshore? Or is it only limited to the agri sector and chemical sector industries?
So maybe I take this one. So the methodology was developed with the purpose on being applied cross-sectoral or across industries. And we can, in the end, make the analogy to the building blocks approach when we're looking into the reporting space. So this general guidance is cross-industry, but for sure you can, in the end, add additional specifics for specific sectors, as we have done this for the agro sector and the chemical sector, and as we have also done for the apparel sector, and the documents, as mentioned, can be released. Was a question on steel, but also on oil and gas. This has been not be covered or being part of the transparent project, but for sure there is room, or for sure there should be efforts in the end to more detail them for the specific sectors.
Thank you.
But maybe to add on this, one point, many oil companies have plastics production, yeah, and similar logic that applies to chemical industry, you can definitely use chemical guidance, yeah, and general guidance for some parts of your business.
Ian, please.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, I just wondered if there's something in the guidance about the risk of double counting between the property values and the other values that is suggested are measured.
I can take
So,
this.
yep.
Yeah, so we don't explicitly consider double counting of those impacts, but rather make the statement that you should be aware of double counting, which might happen indeed, like you said. So not explicitly covered in the document. Wanted to add on this question because you also wanted to
I think
comment.
just a general comment. I think what we need to recognize that we are all here at the beginning of this journey, as you usually say. There are many attempts and approaches now to look into, let's call it, extending financial accounting, be it natural, be it social, be it human capital. And I think here we all need to learn and we need to stick together. And double accounting for sure, Ian, is one of the key questions, especially if you're thinking about scope-free applications. Catherine, please.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for the brilliant presentations. It's fantastic to see the developments going on. I was just wondering, in your opinions at this stage, how applicable the methodology would be for smaller organisations like SMEs and a lot of organisations along the supply chain. The examples have mostly been for larger companies.
So I can take this one, and I'm coming back, I'm coming back to the whole question around links to other frameworks, standards, and legislation right after the Q&A session. So be a little bit patient. With regard to SMEs, yes, for sure, there are considerations to apply these methodologies for SMEs. But as with regard to the current standards for reporting, this work that we're currently doing, I would assume, is a bit too complex for SMEs, but there are efforts and there should be follow-up projects coming up in the end, how we can limit the requirements or how we make them applicable for SMEs. But this will be a longer journey for sure, similar to financial accounting. Martin, please.
Yes, thank you. My question also goes in the direction of double counting. In the paper and the study that we have done, we have separated out, or we have not considered the downstream impact because a downstream impact includes a number of stakeholders, whereas if you make a purchase decision, you're deciding ultimately if you purchase that product or service or not. So you can decide not to do so. So ultimately, you have control over the impacts in the upstream value chain, but downstream, there's a lot of players involved. That's why we suggest to separate out, at least in the presentation, to count the upstream and own operations as one, because only then you can make a reasonable KPI with revenue, and downstream have that as a separate information, because it's a different question. It's a different accounting technique. Downstream, you're accounting the marginal impact that you have potentially with your product and not the absolute impacts. And setting downstream and upstream to be the same category of impacts is something that I think is a critical component of impact accounting. So I wondered if you'd talked or addressed that also a little bit in your methodology.
Larry, would you like to start, or should I take it?
I can. So yeah, thanks for the comment. And indeed, for downstream, actually, like you said, there's often the comparison to another product that could have been developed or different use. So it's a different baseline that you're comparing your impacts again, typically. So for what we have also seen in the pilot, that some companies, or that the scope is a little bit different for downstream than for upstream and own operations. So separating out is what we recommend in transparent, to clearly indicate where do your impacts occur. Are they where in your value chain? And in fact, we're really careful about adding any values up. So we do recommend that you should keep them kind of separate to be clear who is affected and which value chain level. Yeah, that's our take in transparent here.
But Martin, you're addressing, I think, one of the key questions which needs to be solved with regard to further development of the methodologies. And from my perspective, it should be policymakers, or it should be the standard setters of this world who are guiding us with regard to these kinds of questions.
Thank you.
I don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, hey, my name is Sami Elgen, and from the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. Thanks a lot for the wonderful presentation and report. I think this will be really valuable for this whole field. My question was a little bit related perhaps to the future plans or something that you might be kind of extending this towards. I was wondering, have you thought about how this kind of framework or approach could be applied to also understand the kind of handprint or positive impacts, and how we can enhance the state of natural capital through avoiding, for example, these different impact drivers and so on? Do you think, have you thought anything about that, or is there any elements related to that in the protocol already?
Yeah, would you go first, or should I take it?
You can go.
I can go? Good. So, Sami, yes, for sure, there are considerations, what you're mentioning as handprint, looking at the more positive impacts. When we're talking about nature, they mainly occur in the area of the application of the business portfolio. So we're looking at scope 3, but also aspects like compensation and similar aspects are in discussion, are in consideration to integrate this into, let's say, the accounting area with regard to natural capital. But as said before, yes, we are still in the beginning here.
Great, thanks a lot.
There's a question from Fabio. Fabio, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, here's Fabio from Novartis. I wanted to ask if, thanks so much for the presentation, very clear. I wanted to ask to what extent and if there are deviations to the VBA standard, or if we're reporting on the VBA methodology, can we say it's also totally aligned on the natural capital from transparent? Or if there are any deviations, what is different to the VBA methodology? Thank you.
Yeah, so the transparent or NCMA methodology, I'm still used to saying transparent methodology, is very closely aligned to the VBA methodology, since we also have the same goal in estimating and valuing impacts on society for the natural capital space. So we do aim for the consistency between those documents and between the methodologies. In transparent, we've also learned some potential extensions of the methodology that will be taken up then by the VBA again to support this methodology update. So they are interrelated and closely linked to each other.
Christian, there's 2 questions in the chat as well. In the Q&A. Do you want me to read them out?
Yeah. So on the TNFD, I can cover in a second. With regards to the financial sector, yes, the financial sector can make use of these kinds of methodologies. There's quite some work ongoing or pre-week from the colleagues from the Harvard Business School, a project called Impact Weighted Accounts, which is now transformed into an organization which is called the International Foundation for Value and Impacts. And they have approached the whole impact area from the impact investing perspective, and it's building exactly on the same principles as the project we are running here together. So it can be applied, but with a different perspective of the, let's say, users. Should we move to the, yes, Emily, please?
Can you hear me okay, Christian?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I just thought I'd, as Emily McKenzie here, I'm the technical director in the TNFD. Just because of the question on that, thought I'd just mention that I'm here. It's been fantastic to hear the presentations, working closely with Marta and the team to learn both from the Align project and the Transparent project, as we are in the final stages of finalizing the TNFD framework for version 1 in September. But we, of course, the disclosure recommendations and implementation guidance will be finalized in September. We see our guidance to complement that continuing to evolve beyond that date. So we'll be reviewing what's been produced today. It's great timing for us to fold in what we can now and then continue to work with the team as things evolve in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Emily. So maybe, Justine, if you can pull up the last slide, please, because I think some question might come up when we are looking a little bit at this whole landscape and how it's informing the work, what we are doing. So as said, we are here really in the beginning, and just with regard to timing, we kicked off this work, which was called and labeled Transparent, which is now called NCMA, about a little bit more than 3 years ago. So there was quite some additional, let's call it, streams in parallel running. The ISSB started to take up the work. GI was running or is still running consultations, especially the CSRD and related ESRS standards from EFRAG with regard to sustainability reporting have been developed in parallel. Also, we know that the TCFD has been applied step by step, and the TNFD, as just outlined by Emily, is still in the making, and we have seen the beta versions, and the first draft will be published in September. So what you can take from all of this, work is done in parallel. There's a huge movement in the end with looking into how you should measure your impact and your dependencies on nature. There are several methodologies currently in the making. And yes, I think the team in Transparent, but all the other heads, we are all worrying. We are in close discussions. So as Emily just mentioned this one, Emily, we had a call beginning of this week, how in the end we can bring the things much, much better together to avoid any kind of double work, inconsistencies, and so on in the work what we are doing. Can this be avoided? To be quite open, not at this point in time. But the good signs in the end are that we are all collaborating in this field. And I think if we are looking at the main purpose of, call it, extended accounting methodologies as Transparent is positioned, we should always be aware that it serves more or less two purposes. The first one is generating data for internal decision-making in the company. So we're talking about management accounting, like decision-making and steering of a company. But for sure, the second purpose is, yes, looking into reporting and disclosure frameworks, which are currently in developing, in development. And yes, one of the main purposes we also see here that the data we are generating should be auditable and serve both purposes. But for sure, we need to see how the final standards might look like. The ISSB is disclosing the first batch of standards this month. We are expecting that IFRAC is running the first consultation on the CSRD, or the commission on the CSRD, before it's already kicked off this week, but we need to see when it's coming out. And for sure, when a methodology like transparent needs to be further developed, also to take the standards with regard to external disclosures into account. This is also a reason why we are in close conversations with also the European Commission. So Anna is here on the line representing DG Environment. We have several discussions for sure with DG FISMA on this matter. And what we can say as of today, yes, the work we are doing in this project Transparent, but as well as Align, the sister project on biodiversity aspects, they are reflected in the CSRD, they are reflected in the ESRS standards, especially in the E4 standards in the draft versions on biodiversity, if you're looking into the whole aspect of financial effects on nature. So this is where these methodologies are really feeding in. So we are looking forward how the Commission is going to use Transparent. We're going to see how in the end the standard setters take this up, like the ISSB, like GRI, like IFRAC as the three big ones, but also other jurisdictions. And I think we need to understand much, much more from the practical communities, like Anna mentioned, the corporates to take this up, but also financial market actors, how to make use of these, let's say, new kinds of consistent data in all of the different applications like financial market products, but also within the corporates for decision-making and steering. I hope this sheds a little bit of light how to position Transparent in the main purpose and objective here. Are there additional questions? If this is not the case, you have seen that we are going to share the slides right after this call. And first, I want to thank all of you for joining in. I want to thank all of you who have contributed to the consultations we were running and also to the discussions which we had with the whole complete stakeholder community. And last but not least, I really want to thank the team, the consortium we were running over 3 years now. There's still a few weeks to go in the end to publish the sector guidances. So many, many thanks for all of you. Many, many thanks for all the contributions you have made and for the support. And hopefully soon you have a good and relaxing weekend. Take care. Many thanks. See you soon. And stay tuned to keep this movement running. Thank you.
Are we staying?